240. That's how many towns in Florida have simply vanished, gone, wiped off the map like they never existed. Think about that. Entire towns with schools, churches, general stores, and families who lived their whole lives there. And today, nothing but ruins swallowed by the woods. There's one town out here that had a governor's mansion with running water and a telephone before most of America even had electricity. You could walk straight through the middle of it right now and never know a soul once called it home. So what happened? What could make a whole town just disappear? Here's the wild part. Most of these places are missing from the maps on your phone, and hardly anyone will tell you where they are. But I will. Stay till the end, because number 7 hides a tragedy Florida tried to forget. Let's go. Number 1, Ellaville. Picture this, a town of 1,000 people roaring with life, sawmills screaming through cypress logs, railroad cars being built by hand, and money flowing through the streets like the two rivers that framed it, the Suwannee and the Withlacoochee. This was Ellaville, and in the late 1800s, it was one of the most alive places in North Florida. It was the empire of a man named George Franklin Drew, who would later become governor of Florida. His sawmill was one of the largest in the entire state. Workers poured in. Families settled. A grand governor's mansion rose up over the riverbank. For a while, Ellaville looked unstoppable. Then it all came apart. The timber that built the town eventually ran dry, the mills slowed, and in 1895, a brutal act of violence tore through the community and shattered whatever hope was left. Families packed up. One by one, the lights went out. The post office somehow clung on until 1942, and then even that fell silent. Today, Ellaville is a ghost. The ruins of that governor's mansion are buried under vines and creeping roots. Crumbling foundations peek out of the underbrush. Stand there at dusk and you can almost hear the mills again, echoing off the water. Here's the part nobody mentions. This stretch of Madison County holds some of the cheapest rural acreage in Florida, and there's a cold, practical reason why. River-adjacent ghost town land floods. There's no infrastructure, no sewer, no reliable power, no easy road in. The beauty is real, but so is the risk. And that's the first hard lesson of this entire video. When land is this cheap, the price is always telling you something. Cheap dirt near dead towns is cheap because the same forces that killed the town, floods, isolation, no economy, are still there today. Ellaville boomed, bled, and vanished. Remember its name because the pattern you just saw? It repeats 11 more times. Number 2, White City. Most ghost towns are killed by nature. White City was killed by a liar. Rewind to the early 1890s. A group of hopeful Danish settlers from the Midwest packed everything they owned and headed south to St. Lucie County. They had a dream, a tidy little farming community by the water, built by their own hands. They named it White City, and for a moment, that dream was working. Homes went up, crops went in, a real town began to breathe. Then he arrived, a smooth-talking stranger who called himself Colonel Myers. He rolled into town with big promises and an even bigger smile. He told the settlers he'd build them a bank, he'd handle their savings, he'd sell them prime land parcels. Just put a down payment here, hand over your life savings there. The colonel was a fraud. There was no bank. There was no land deal. He collected every dollar the trusting settlers would give him, and then he vanished into thin air, leaving an entire community financially gutted. As if that wasn't cruel enough, a devastating freeze swept in and killed what was left of their crops. White City never recovered. What makes this one so unsettling is how modern it feels. A land scheme, a scam over property and fake investments, wiped out an entire town over a century ago. Sound familiar? It should. It happens today. You can still visit what remains. The old town marketplace survives, now living a second life as an antique shop, its shelves full of the past. And here's your practical takeaway, the one that could someday save your savings. If you ever chase one of these cheap Florida land deals, White City is your warning. Before a single dollar leaves your account, verify the seller, verify the title, verify the property actually exists the way it's advertised. Because the modern-day Colonel Myers is still out there, and he's advertising cheap land right now. Number 3, Kismet. Some towns die slowly over decades. Kismet died in a single night. Travel back to Lake County, 1884. Kismet was a jewel of Central Florida, a booming citrus town wrapped in endless orange groves. Its crown was a magnificent 50-room hotel packed with wealthy northern snowbirds who came down to escape the frozen winters back home. Business was thriving. The oranges were golden. The future looked as warm as the Florida sun. There's even a piece of history here that will stop you cold. In 1888, a young couple stood in Kismet and got married. Their names were Elias and Flora Disney, the future parents of Walt Disney. The man who would dream up Disney World had roots in a Florida town that no longer exists. But nature doesn't care about dreams. In the winter of 1889, a catastrophic freeze descended on Central Florida. In one brutal, unforgiving night, the temperature plunged, and the orange groves that fed the entire town turned black. Every tree, every branch, every dollar the town depended on, frozen solid and dead by morning. Kismet didn't stand a chance. With its one industry destroyed overnight, the people had no reason to stay. They walked away and left it to the weeds. The Grand Hotel, the groves, the streets, all of it faded into memory. And here's the lesson buried in Kismet's frozen ground, the one every cheap land buyer needs tattooed on their brain. A single climate event can erase an entire town's economy. One freeze, one storm, one night. That is precisely why the dirt out here got so cheap. The land didn't just lose a town, it lost the reason for a town to exist. So when you see a bargain lot in old citrus country, ask yourself the Kismet question. What disaster happened here? And could it happen again? Because in Florida, the weather has erased entire towns before, and it can do it again. Number 4, Fort Drum. Some ghost towns leave behind ruins. Fort Drum left behind mostly graves. Head west of the Florida Turnpike into the wide, lonely flatlands of the interior, and you'll find what's left of Fort Drum. After the Civil War, hardy cattlemen pushed into this rugged country, driving herds across the open range and carving out a rough frontier life. A community grew. There was a school. There were families. There was a reason to be here. But the interior of Florida is a hard place to hold on to. There was no coast to draw tourists, no booming crop like citrus, no railroad hub pumping money through Main Street. Fort Drum lived on cattle and grit, and slowly, as the world modernized and moved on, the people drifted away to towns with more opportunity. Today, Fort Drum is one of the quietest ghosts on this list. What remains is a cemetery, rows of weathered headstones baking under the sun, and an old schoolhouse that's since been reborn as an antique shop. Drive through, and you might blink and miss it entirely. That's how completely the town dissolved back into the landscape. Now here's why Fort Drum matters to you. These drive-through Central Florida ghost towns sit surrounded by some of the cheapest inland parcels in the entire state. We're talking rock-bottom prices. And the reason is written all over Fort Drum's empty fields. There are no jobs, no water hookups, no sewer, no booming town nearby to give the land any real value. It is raw, remote, wide-open emptiness. But here's the twist. For a certain kind of buyer, that emptiness is the entire appeal. The off-grid dreamer. The person who wants nothing but silence, sky, and space to disappear. For them, cheap and empty isn't a warning. It's a feature. So Fort Drum asks you a question. Is empty land a dead end or a fresh start? For the right person, that graveyard quiet silence is worth more than gold. Number 5, Yukon. Everything you've seen so far has been remote, rural, far from anywhere. So here's the one that breaks every rule. A full-blown ghost town hiding inside a major American city. Meet Yukon. It sits in Jacksonville, Florida, a bustling metropolis of nearly 1 million people, right beside the Naval Air Station. And that location, the very thing that gave Yukon life, is exactly what killed it. Yukon was a real working community. People lived there, worked there, raised families in the shadow of the growing military base. But as the Naval Air Station expanded and its aircraft grew louder and more constant roaring overhead, the town's fate was sealed. The planes needed clear skies. The homes were directly in the way. In 1963, the Navy made the call. Yukon was declared a flight hazard and shut down. The residents were cleared out. The town was emptied, not by a hurricane or a freeze or a con man, but by the relentless growth of the base next door. And here's what makes it eerie. Some of Yukon's buildings still stand today, preserved in what is now a public park. You can walk among the remnants of a town the Navy erased, with a modern city humming all around you. Now here's the takeaway that most people completely miss. Abandonment is not always rural. It's not always out in the swamp or the deep interior. Sometimes the strangest, most overlooked pieces of land are hiding in plain sight, tucked into a city you drive through every single week without a second glance. There are odd parcels, forgotten lots, and strange zoned patches scattered inside metro areas all across Florida. Most buyers only ever look way out there for a deal, but the smart ones know the truth Yukon teaches. Sometimes the ghost isn't in the countryside at all. Sometimes it's right under your nose, surrounded by the noise of the living, quietly waiting to be noticed. Number 6. Caps. Every ghost town on this list was built on one thing. For Caps, that one thing was an oil you've probably never even heard of. Just east of Tallahassee, in the rolling country of North Florida, sat the town of Caps. And in its heyday, Caps was the beating heart of a booming industry, the production of tung oil. Never heard of it? You've almost certainly touched it. Tung oil, pressed from the nuts of the tung tree, was once a critical ingredient in varnishes, paints, and wood finishes all across America. Caps became home to one of the largest tung oil manufacturers in the entire country. The tung groves spread across the landscape. Workers came for the jobs. Money flowed in. For a while, this quiet corner of Florida was an unlikely industrial powerhouse, all built on the humble nut of a tree. Then progress did what progress always does. Scientists developed synthetic substitutes, cheaper, factory-made chemicals that did the same job without the groves, the harvest, or the labor. Almost overnight, the world stopped needing tung oil, and when the demand died, so did Caps. The industry that gave the town its entire reason to exist simply evaporated. Today, one remarkable survivor still stands, the historic Asa May House, built around 1836. So significant, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a lonely, elegant reminder of a town that time forgot. And here's the pattern you need to burn into your memory, because you've now seen it again. Ghost towns die when their one industry dies. Timber killed Ellaville when it ran out. A freeze killed Kismet citrus. And a chemistry lab killed Caps. So here's the practical wisdom, and it's timeless. Never bet everything on a single product. Not a town, not an investment, not a piece of land tied to one crop or one factory. Because when that one thing disappears, everything built on top of it disappears with it. Number 6. Caps. Every ghost town on this list was built on one thing. For Caps, that one thing was an oil you've probably never even heard of. Just east of Tallahassee, in the rolling country of North Florida, sat the town of Caps. And in its heyday, Caps was the beating heart of a booming industry, the production of tung oil. Never heard of it? You've almost certainly touched it. Tung oil, pressed from the nuts of the tung tree, was once a critical ingredient in varnishes, paints, and wood finishes all across America. Caps became home to one of the largest tung oil manufacturers in the entire country. The tung groves spread across the landscape. Workers came for the jobs. Money flowed in. For a while, this quiet corner of Florida was an unlikely industrial powerhouse, all built on the humble nut of a tree. Then progress did what progress always does. Scientists developed synthetic substitutes, cheaper, factory-made chemicals that did the same job without the groves, the harvest, or the labor. Almost overnight, the world stopped needing tung oil, and when the demand died, so did Caps. The industry that gave the town its entire reason to exist simply evaporated. Today, one remarkable survivor still stands, the historic Asa May House, built around 1836. So significant, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a lonely, elegant reminder of a town that time forgot. And here's the pattern you need to burn into your memory, because you've now seen it again. Ghost towns die when their one industry dies. Timber killed Ellaville when it ran out. A freeze killed Kismet citrus. And a chemistry lab killed Caps. So here's the practical wisdom, and it's timeless. Never bet everything on a single product. Not a town, not an investment, not a piece of land tied to one crop or one factory. Because when that one thing disappears, everything built on top of it disappears with it. Number 8, Cedar Key. Some towns are killed by nature, some by con men. Cedar Key was killed by betrayal and a railroad that turned its back. Out on Florida's Gulf Coast, on a cluster of islands, Cedar Key was once a genuine powerhouse. In the late 1800s, this was a town that mattered. It thrived on salt production, fishing, and shipbuilding. Its port bustled with trade. At its peak, hundreds of people called it home, and the local economy hummed with the constant rhythm of work, water, and commerce. Cedar Key wasn't a sleepy village. It was a serious player on the Florida map. Then came the moment that changed everything. A new railway was pushing through the region, the lifeline that decided which towns would live and which would wither. Cedar Key was counting on it. The whole future of the town depended on that rail connection tying it to the rest of the state. But the railroad bypassed it. The tracks went elsewhere. And just like that, the trade, the shipping, and the momentum that fueled Cedar Key began to drain away. Cut off from the arteries of commerce, the town slowly withered. Now, to be fair, Cedar Key isn't completely dead. A small, quiet community lingers today. But the glory is gone. Decaying docks stretch into the water. Old brick buildings stand as monuments to a busier age. The ghosts of the boom are everywhere you look. And the lesson here is absolutely timeless. Infrastructure decides which towns live and which towns die. A road, a rail line, a highway exit. Move that one artery and you can starve an entire community or make one rich overnight. So before you buy anywhere cheap, ask the Cedar Key question. What road, what rail line, what connection got moved, skipped, or rerouted? And why? Because cheap land is often just a town the infrastructure left behind. And infrastructure rarely comes back. Number 9, Fort Dade, Egmont Key. Every town you've seen so far still sits on solid ground. This next one is literally disappearing into the sea. Right now as you watch this. At the mouth of Tampa Bay lies a small remote island called Egmont Key, and on it once stood a bustling military town called Fort Dade. This wasn't a rough frontier outpost. Fort Dade was comfortable. At the turn of the century, it had everything its 300 residents could want. A movie theater, a hospital, paved brick roads, even tennis courts. It was a complete, self-contained community, thriving on its own island in the sun. The fort was built to defend Tampa Bay, a proud piece of America's coastal armor. For years it stood strong, its soldiers and their families living the island life. But its military purpose faded, and in 1923, Fort Dade was deactivated. The people left. The town emptied. And then something began that no con man or freeze ever did. The ocean itself started reclaiming it. The relentless waves, the tides, and the storms began eating the island alive. Today, the ruins of Fort Dade are slowly sliding into the sea. Crumbling gun batteries sit half swallowed by water. That old brick road now leads in places straight into the waves. Here's the catch. You can't buy this one. Egmont Key is a protected state park, reachable only by boat. But I included it for a reason far more important than a bargain. Fort Dade is the most vivid warning in all of Florida of a terrifying truth. The land itself can vanish. Not the town, the actual ground beneath it. And that leads to the single most overlooked risk in cheap Florida coastal property, erosion. That dreamy, cheap lot near the water. The water may be planning to take it. Fort Dade proves it. The sea is patient, and it always collects. Number 10, Hopewell. Forget spooky ghosts and rattling chains for a moment. Hopewell shows you what abandonment truly looks like, and it's stranger and quieter than any horror movie. In Hillsborough County, Hopewell has a heavy, complicated history. It began around a plantation worked by enslaved people. After emancipation, that land was broken up into small homesteads, and freed families built new lives here, farming the soil and raising the next generation. A real community took root among the fields. But like so many towns on this list, Hopewell couldn't hold. The economy shifted. Opportunity moved elsewhere. And slowly, family by family, the people left their homes behind. What happened next is the eerie part. Nature moved in. Today, Hopewell is nearly gone, but not because of fire, flood, or wrecking ball. It's because the forest simply took it back. The old homes were swallowed by trees and choked with vines, wrapped so completely in green that many are now too dangerous to even enter. Roots have cracked the walls, branches have punched through roofs. The Florida wilderness is quietly digesting an entire town. Only a few survivors remain visible. A church, a cemetery, and a couple of weathered old homes, all ringed by endless citrus groves. Stand there and you're looking at a place where the line between town and jungle has almost completely dissolved. And this gives you the clearest, most honest picture of what abandon really means up close. It's usually not dramatic. It's not haunted mansions and creaking doors. It's silent, patient, relentless. It's nature erasing everything one root and one vine at a time. So here's your hard-nosed, practical lesson. If you buy raw ghost town land, understand this going in. The jungle is already winning. Clearing it, holding it, and keeping it usable costs real money and constant work. Because in Florida, you're never really buying land from the wilderness. You're only borrowing it, and the forest always wants it back. Number 11. Oslo. By now, you know the deadly formula. One industry, one crash, one ghost town. And few towns prove it as perfectly, or as sweetly, as Oslo. In Indian River County, a determined group of Scandinavian immigrants put down roots and built a town they named Oslo, after the faraway capital of Norway. These were tough, hard-working people, far from home, chasing a warmer future in the Florida sun. And they found their fortune in the most unexpected, tropical crop imaginable: the pineapple. At its peak, Oslo was a genuine pineapple empire. We're not talking about a garden or a few plants. This town cultivated an astonishing 100,000 pineapple plants, their spiky green crowns stretching across the landscape. The pineapple was the town's pride, its paycheck, and its entire identity. For a while, business was golden. Then came the 1-2 punch that flattened so many American dreams. First, World War I disrupted everything: labor, shipping, markets, and money. Then the Great Depression rolled in like a slow-moving storm and finished the job. Local businesses buckled. The pineapple industry that the whole town stood on collapsed. And Oslo, like the 11 towns before it, began to fade. But here's a small, stubborn miracle. Oslo isn't completely gone. One survivor still stands and still works to this day: the Oslo Citrus Growers Association, proudly holding its title as the oldest packing house on Florida's entire East Coast. A living thread connecting the present back to that vanished pineapple empire. And there it is again, the pattern you've now watched destroy town after town after town. One crop, one crash, one ghost. Timber, citrus, tung oil, salt, and now pineapples. So let Oslo hammer the point home for the final time. Any place or any investment built on a single product is standing on a trapdoor. When that one crop popped, so did the entire town. Every single time. Number 12. Archer. We end our journey right back where Florida's ghost town story truly began, with the boom that started it all and the pattern that killed them all. Welcome to Archer in north central Florida. In the late 1800s, this town exploded into life on the back of one powerful, invisible force buried in the ground beneath it: phosphate. If you don't know what phosphate is, you've eaten food grown with it. It's the key ingredient in fertilizer, one of the most valuable substances in modern agriculture. When phosphate was discovered here, the rush was on. Miners poured in by the hundreds. Railroads were laid to haul the mineral out. Businesses opened. Money flowed. Archer became a key player in Florida's booming economy, a rough-and-tumble mining town buzzing with ambition and grit. For a while, the ground itself seemed to be made of money. But you already know how this story goes. You've heard it 11 times. The phosphate, like the timber, the citrus, the tung oil, the salt, and the pineapples before it, eventually ran out. And when the mineral that built Archer was exhausted, The reason for the town to exist vanished with it. The miners moved on. The railroads went quiet. Today, Archer holds on to scattered fragments of its glory days. Old buildings weathered by time, and lonely cemeteries tucked into the fields and woods. And the locals? They'll tell you with a knowing look that the miners never really left, that their restless spirits still wander the old tracks and abandoned mines at night. Archer is the perfect town to end on because it captures the entire brutal cycle you've watched unfold across this whole list. Boom, extract, exhaust, abandon. Over and over, town after town, Florida built empires on a single treasure, and then watched them die the moment that treasure was gone. 12 towns, 12 ghosts, one relentless pattern, and now you can see it everywhere. So here's the burning question. How does land in and around these dead towns actually sell for less than the phone in your hand? It's real, and there are exactly 3 ways it happens. First, county tax deed auctions. When an owner stops paying property taxes for years, the county eventually seizes the property and auctions off the deed. Rural lots near dead towns often open at just a few $100s because nobody else bothers to bid. Second, discount lot dealers, companies that buy land in bulk and resell tiny parcels online, sometimes under $300 with low monthly payments. Third, plain neglected vacant lots in low-demand counties like Calhoun, Putnam, and inland Sarasota. But before you get excited, run this 4-point check. This is what protects your money. 1. Confirm legal road access so your lot isn't landlocked like Rollestown. 2. Pull the back tax and lien history because some cheap deeds carry hidden debt. 3. Verify the zoning. Can you legally build or even camp? 4. Physically look at the parcel on foot or by satellite because plenty of these are swamp, floodplain, or underwater half the year. Do all 4 and the fantasy in the title becomes something real. Not owning a town, but owning a genuine, haunting piece of Florida's forgotten history for less than your monthly phone bill. If this changed how you see those cheap Florida land ads you keep scrolling past, do me one favor. Smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more curious minds. Subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive. And drop a comment. Which of these 12 ghost towns would you be brave enough to visit at night? I read every single one. Want more? Check out my video on Florida's abandoned mansions. It's on screen right now.